So, Chuck, thank you for being here to talk about what is an inherently complicated topic. As you and I were just discussing, I have this desire to try to figure out how we approach this, you know, really hard conversation around the role of business injustice. And I think part of that starts with just acknowledging what it even means to, talk about systemic injustice, economic injustice. So can you tell us a little bit about you, the work that you do, and just even your own perspective and insights around this, very broad conversation around injustice?
Sure. I mean, I should say I grew up in a kind of successful entrepreneurial family. My great grandfather was the meat packer Oscar Mayer. Of course, I'm 4 generations later, so I can't really claim any entrepreneurial edge at that point. But I am tuned into the ways in which, really, in the last 40 years, we've pulled apart as a society, and I would say we're living in a period of extreme inequality of income, wealth, and opportunity. And I think there's a really powerful downside for big businesses and particularly small businesses that are trying to, operate in this environment. So I see how these inequalities kind of undermine a lot of the things we care about, including having a healthy market economy.
Yeah, and so talk to us about, so one of the things that I think so many business leaders feel conflicted about is the idea that if we're worried about, inequality and the people who don't have as much, somehow that will mean we'll have less. And the game of business has preached for a very long time, right, that the goal of business is to get more. And so it feels at odds. I don't have that belief, obviously. I believe that we all win together, and the more we all have and the more we all share, the better we all are. But that is counterculture in the kind of community of business. What have you learned, or what do you know about, this idea of, how actually creating more equality is good for business? It's good for everyone.
Well, I think it is sort of counterintuitive, and I want to acknowledge, a lot of us who are thinking about business are already maxed out in terms of time, and to sort of tackle a sort of big meta problem that's sort of outside our day-to-day operations is daunting, and it's not up to business to fix this. I mean, it's the entire society. We all need to take responsibility for addressing it, but I think it is important to recognize the ways in which it touches us as businesses, as enterprises. I think there's a lot of research now showing that 40 years of stagnant wages, increasing concentrated wealth flowing to the top, creates volatility in the marketplace. It obviously affects aggregate demand, meaning our customers don't have as much money in their pocket to buy the things that we're creating. It leads to sort of more speculative booms and busts, because at the very top you have people with so much money that they're kind of going out on a limb for speculative returns. So all those things are not good for a healthy, stable, free market economy. And some institutions and enterprises have considerably more power, market share, wealth, and that they're using that power to kind of tip the rules in their favor. And we know that's not good. So there's a lot of reasons to care. I think the other kind of intuitive response is, if we're going to fix these inequalities, as you say, Carissa, it's going to require us to pay more, or it's going to have an impact on our bottom line. People are going to look to business to fix this. And I have one, business leader friend who says, people always say, if we, for instance, tax wealthy people to fund lower cost education or something like that, which is a proposal you hear a lot, won't that kill the goose that laid the golden egg? Won't that undermine prosperity? And my friend Peter Georgescu, who wrote this terrific book called Capitalists Arise, retired CEO of Rubicam & Young, a big ad agency, he says, actually, these inequalities are poisoning the goose. So in a way, it's like deeply in our self-interest to figure out, both on a firm-by-firm company level, how to reduce inequality, how we can raise the wage floor when possible, et cetera, but also look at the larger trends of what's happening in society and how that might backfire on our beloved goose.
Yeah, the beloved goose. That's got to be a title for something at some point.
Yeah, the goose, that goose with her golden egg. I don't know, you know.
So
We're all gonna be okay.
yeah, we are. That I do think we're all going to be okay. Although I think we've got a rocky road to get back to okay. Something that you said I think is really important, and again, we were talking about this before we started. This idea that I think we oftentimes as business owners feel like we've worked so hard to have what we have, and we are tired, and we are, burnt out sometimes, and we are maxed out in a lot of ways. And so some of the resistance that I've experienced when I have started to talk more openly about this idea of business taking a on-purpose role in economic justice is just people saying like, I have no more time. I have no more space. I have no more energy. I can't even think about this. It's too complicated. Do you have any advice for someone who may be listening, who feels that way, to make it feel less complicated, right? Like what are ways that we can approach this that don't feel so overwhelming, that just move us into small areas of understanding and action? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think what you described is what I see as well. I think one thing I would say is to realize that a lot of business associations, small business groups, larger chambers, don't really, if you care about these issues of inequality, the organizations that we pay our dues to are often lobbying in the wrong direction, meaning they're lobbying for tax cuts, they're lobbying for policies that will worsen inequality. So one thing we can do is, if we're paying dues to be part of a business association, make sure, that they're doing the right thing, or join a business association that's advocating for policies to reduce inequality, of which there are a few, So that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
The other is, it is a big problem. It is overwhelming. I mean, whether you're a business leader or just Jane Q public, it's too much. It's a lot. But I think I would go back to, we knew coming out of World War II in the United States context how to create a shared prosperity economy. We made public investments in infrastructure, in technology, in education. We've made investments in people so they could go to college without debt, to enable people to become first-time homebuyers, get on the wealth-building train. We did things together that expanded the middle class and had a dynamic impact on the whole overall economy. And we know how to do those things. And we've actually kind of we've gone off track on some of those fundamentals. So part of it is realizing that it's not, during a time of great prosperity, let's say the 30 years after World War II, we actually grew together as a society. Now we're pulling apart, and that creates challenges for the economy. So each of us are voters. Each of us are involved in our communities and civic life. We can bring a perspective of how do we build a shared prosperity economy to pretty much everything we do. And I think it's just to integrate it into what we already do.
I love that. That's so practical. I love that, like the practicality of that. So I have two thoughts that, based on what you've just said, that both are equally controversial. So let's wrestle with them. The first, I remember in the last election, and I think it's worth saying that this should not be a party issue. Like, I really believe that the idea of just creating systemic justice should not be a party issue. This is a human issue in my very genuine belief, and I don't think it's a political issue. I think it's a human issue. It's obviously got a lot of political energy around it in today's world. And I remember in the last election, when I was talking about some of these things, people in America in particular would say, "Oh my God, you're such a socialist." And I was like, "No, I'm not a socialist. I'm just Canadian." Like, these are not such shocking ideas. These are ideas that are already in infrastructure in so many other countries. And so, there's a lot. I ended up in a lot of these conversations with people in America in particular who had a belief in what they would call trickle-down economics. If the wealthy get wealthier, more money will flow down into charity and philanthropy, and that will solve the problem. For a lot of reasons, I don't think that makes economic sense. But do you have beyond just my opinion, do you have any perspective on, at an actual economic level, what does work and what does not work to stimulate the economy in a way that everyone can win?
Well, I would agree. I would just echo what you said. We're kind of in a polarized uh, conversation about this. It's hard to have this conversation without sort of being pushed into one camp or another. But I think you're right. We got to get past that. And I actually think from a U.S. perspective, we have a lot to learn from Canada. We have a lot to learn from the Nordic countries who have considerably less inequality. And why is that? Well, one is because there's a high social floor of decency.
Yeah.
There's universal health insurance. There's access to higher education without debt. There's sort of a minimal social welfare, which people cannot fall into destitution. People think of that as a welfare state in the United States, but actually these are pro-work societies. They're trying to prepare people to get into the workforce. There's more public investment in the opportunity ladder, early childhood education, early intervention with healthcare issues, or learning disabilities. My wife, who, if I was born on third base, she would say she's born in the dugout. If they had discovered her learning disability earlier in her life, it would have saved her years of frustration and humiliation in the classroom. So what good societies do is they make investments in people when they're young, and then they commit to lifelong learning. There's a reason why the Nordic countries actually have higher rates of entrepreneurship per capita than the United States, because let's be honest, to take an entrepreneurial leap requires some superhuman qualities. It's not for everybody, but it often requires some sense of security and a family social safety net. So if we're restricting ourselves in the United States, the people who can be entrepreneurs, to those who have family social safety nets, who have, a net, if you will, if they fail, then we're missing out. And in a society, a Nordic country where you have a social safety net, more people can take those risks to pursue their bold ideas. So that's where I think, it's important to recognize extreme inequality is not good for business. It's not good for creating a healthy entrepreneurial culture, and it's not good for our neighbors who may not be in the business sector. We don't want them to resent business either. And I think paying, the Nordic countries, Canada, you have higher taxes, you have a progressive tax system, but my friends in those countries are like, well, my kids are going to college for free. I'm not worrying about my parents' long-term health care. I know my neighbors are not in desperation. That matters, So I think we have a lot to learn from those of us in the United States from the simple ways in which other societies have wired their economies for greater equality.
Yeah, I believe in that. It's interesting. When I first moved to New York and I brought my business down here, and I started recognizing, my tax rate went down a little bit, but quite frankly, not that much. And then I added in the healthcare costs in the US compared to Canada. And then I added in the idea that if I had kids, then I would have to start saving for their, $500,000 education. All of a sudden the numbers, there's so much angst around, for example, healthcare for all. But the numbers as a business owner, arguably it'd be cheaper to pay a little more in tax and have that financial burden come off my business. And so even from a pure numbers and cents point of view, the angst around some of those things don't make sense to me at a very logical, purely financial, even selfish level, quite frankly.
Yeah, we know those of us in the United States pay more for our healthcare and get less than pretty much anywhere in the industrialized world. So yeah, just as you say, it doesn't, from a strictly financial point of view, we should be paying attention to, there's no good reason why healthcare should be attached to employment.
Totally.
Why is that?
Totally.
That's silly.
Totally.
That should not be a burden that small businesses, whether they want to or not, it should be a burden that they should not have to carry.
Totally. Yeah, it's such an interesting thing how we get a perspective and then we get stuck in it. And instead of actually being open and curious to figure out what the best solution is, which is in fact entrepreneurial, this is one of the things that I've been fascinated by. And I put judgment on myself in this too. In these moments where things are so emotionally charged, like they are in our culture right now, we get sort of dedicated to a stand. And the whole point of entrepreneurship is that we're incredibly curious and we go try to solve a problem. I mean, that is what business owners, if nothing else, we are problem solvers. And I feel like if we could get that perspective back when it comes to some of these complex issues, if we could be back in the mode of problem solving, not fighting for an opinion that we might not even agree with if we thought about it longer, then maybe we'd actually have a chance of tackling this really big, conversation that we're all trying to fight so hard against.
I don't know if this is relevant, but I just came back from Durango, Colorado. And in Durango, Colorado, they have a group called Thrive, which is a table that's business and community leaders that sit down and they try to do an analysis of what's a living wage for that area. And then they identify, businesses pledge to pay that living wage if they can. And that list is public and consumers can support businesses that are paying a living wage. But they also have a lot of businesses that would like to pay a living wage that for various reasons can't. And so they have a whole technical assistance team of business leaders and researchers and helpers who sort of help those businesses analyze, how over 3 years could you raise your wage floor. And it's a great example. It's a voluntary initiative, but it in a sense invites consumers to take responsibility for patronizing enterprises and maybe paying a little bit more to support businesses that pay a decent living wage. Means that the employees are commuting less long distances, they're not taking on second jobs, everybody's happy. So I just give that as an example of the kind of things that I see happening in the United States that are pro-business, pro-worker, and where the community is also taking responsibility for its part and not just putting the burden on an employer.
I love that. And I love that I do believe that there are so many solutions that are truly pro-business, pro-worker, pro-community, pro-economy. It doesn't have to be that someone wins so that someone loses. I really think that there is opportunity, more than enough opportunity, to find solutions that everyone does win. But it requires sitting down and being in conversation and doing some of the hard work to get us there, which is real. So another super complicated conversation that I feel like comes up a lot is this idea of privilege. And for business owners, the reaction against the concept of privilege, because every business owner feels legitimately like they've worked very hard. And so I will say that it's a sign of privilege. I didn't even consider my privilege, right? I didn't even consider that as being a thing. And as I've started to think about and understand more and more how that is true, right? I'm white, I come from a loving family. I lived in a country that I never had to worry about the cost of my university education. If I come from a family that if we lived in the US, we would have struggled to pay, education here, but I didn't have to in Canada, right? So that's all privilege. Now, I've worked my butt off for the last 13 years and I work 100 hours a week, a lot of weeks. And have I worked hard? Yes. Have I taken what I was given and made more from it? Yes. But I started further ahead and I cannot ignore that reality. A lot of business leaders, I feel like to embrace the reality of economic injustice, you have to embrace this idea that some of us are privileged, and that is in fact an inherent element of it. But that is really hard for a lot of people to swallow or comprehend or even just think about. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that's such a hard concept for business leaders in particular to kind of wrap their head around or to feel okay with?
Well, I think it's a really good point you're making. I think that part of it is people don't necessarily see the part you described, the hard work, the sacrifice. I missed my kid's sporting event because I was trying to figure out how to make payroll. I missed their play. That both the isolation that many business leaders feel because they've taken responsibility to make something work no matter what. And so the first part of it is we have to lift up and celebrate those extraordinary sacrifices and gifts, and our society would be greatly diminished without those efforts, So I think on one level, people don't feel heard or seen. And then once we've sort of celebrated and acknowledged it, and that those people should be rewarded financially and in other ways, but then we can say, well, let's step back and say, what's the environment that we created together? Because in fact, no one does it alone. Individuals matter, but so does the fertile ground that we all created together. If you're a farmer and you're trying to grow corn in a parking lot, there's only so far you're going to get with your hard work. There's something about the environment, the soil, and then we begin to see the web of private philanthropy, public investments, community investments, the things that sort of make individual business thrive and prosper. And I think what happens is we kind of get focused on the individual. It becomes kind of polarized between the society investment versus the individual, and we don't have that nuanced understanding that individuals matter, and so does the community environment that makes things possible. So I often, people talk about inequality, and some people will have an immediate defensive response, which is, I worked hard. Of course you did.
Totally.
And let's look at, not some other people work extremely hard too and don't have much to show for it. Let me introduce you to the woman across the street from me who leaves the house at 5 a.m. and works 2 jobs and gets home at 8 p.m. and gets up the next morning and does it again. There are ways in which, and you personally, Carissa, just described, ways in which you had help. And maybe that's another way to think about it is, did you get help? Did you have family help? Did you have society help? Did you have coaches and mentors? Did you have some advantages that maybe not everybody had? And it's no shame to admit that and demystify it, because I think it makes it possible for others to say, well, don't we want that for everyone? Don't we want everybody to have some of those same forms of help so that they too can get on the wagon? If they have a business dream, that they too can participate. One of the big differences is inequality of agency. People like you may have had a little bit of advantage in your life, but then you have a sense of agency, like you can make something happen. A lot of people don't feel that. Whether it's trauma, a legacy of trauma, or just the legacy of poverty and inequality, people don't feel like they can do something and make a difference. And that's a huge disadvantage that we have to acknowledge when we want to bring everybody along.
Totally. It's so interesting. One of the things that I've been trying to think about myself, but then also challenge other people to think about is that, right? Like all of us have a set of circumstances that we're born into. Every single human being. And some of it's good and some of it's bad. Listen, being a woman, being a young blonde woman in the finance and tech space for the last 13 years has had lots of challenges, right? I've had inequality in that way. There's been injustice in that.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of interesting realities. I'm an immigrant in the US. That's complicated and expensive and weird. And that's a disadvantage, right? And then I have my advantages. And so if we could stop, I feel like if we could get to the point as a society where we could all just look at each other, human to human, and say, this human was born with some advantages and some disadvantages. Some of us got more advantages and less disadvantages. Some of us got more disadvantages and less advantages. But each of us have this reality. And the question is, how do we all do the best we can with the reality we were given and celebrate each person's, efforts equally? And to your point, which I think is so helpful, is instead of making it shameful that we all need help, actually acknowledging that this is the human condition. And in fact, when I was 22 and I started my business, I made so many mistakes because I felt like I had to do it by myself. And if I admitted I had no idea what I was doing, I'd be a failure and everyone would decide not to do business with me. And so I made an extraordinary number of very stupid mistakes. And when I finally started asking for help and acknowledging, I don't know what I'm doing, I got more successful. And so if we could take away this individual idea that it's about what I did and how hard I worked and how I'm so smart, and instead could just get back to this idea of we are all interconnected, we all benefit from help, and if we could all figure out how to help each other be as successful as we could be, like, wouldn't that be a better world? Wouldn't that be a relief for all of us, no matter how privileged we are or are not?
I think it's beautiful what you're saying. And I think it's also liberating.
Yes.
Because, and I think it's kind of a male, if I may speak, it's kind of a male construct of like, I have to do it alone, or I did it alone, or we even like have amnesia when it comes to looking backwards in our own lives and telling our own story. And maybe the business media doesn't help because they ask you, so Carissa, what personal qualities and characteristics enabled you to succeed? And they didn't say, so what help did you get along the way to get where you got? You know, it's focusing on the heroic individual, you know, and of course there are heroic individuals. There are people who do, high trapeze acts without nets and all that, but they're rare. They're much rarer than we think. So, and just to say, you know, I said at the beginning, you know, I grew up in a wealthy entrepreneurial family, but when I think about my own circumstances, you know, I was also around people where I learned financial literacy at a young age. You learn about money, you learn about debt, you learn about having a bank account. You create some confidence. There's social capital, social networks. The fact that our business we're white European heritage of people who were in Chicago catering initially to the German business immigrant community. But I have a friend whose family business was in Tulsa, and he was African American, and there was essentially a pogrom that destroyed the Black business district, which unfortunately happened way too often in a lot of cities in the United States during sort of Jim Crow era. So we forget, like, there are these multi-generational factors that are kind of like a tailwind behind people that it takes their talents further than other people's talents and hard work. And I think it's just liberating to admit that. I mean, even in our own family, we have this bootstrapper, narrative about, you know, the family member who came from Europe with an 8th grade education and started a butcher shop, and the next generation got to this point, and then that. But we leave out this really fascinating detail, which is he married somebody who had a significant dowry, which provided the working capital for the business expansion. There goes, you know, like those little details actually, if you leave them out, perpetuate the myth that, hey, anybody can do this. What's the matter with you? As opposed to, the lucky lottery at birth factors. So I think it's liberating for all of us. It's liberating for us guys out there to talk about the web that made it possible. We weren't just raised by wolves in a state of nature. We got help along the way. Even though we've worked hard, we also got help.
You know, I didn't think the conversation would go in this direction, but I'm glad it did, because I say all the time that I think that the story of entrepreneurship has become so flawed. It's not, you know, everyone thinks that they're just going to quit their job, raise millions, sell for billions, you know, be a rock star. And that story is not the story of what it takes to be a business owner in this, you know, in reality. The reality is it's hard, it's lonely, it's complicated. You know, the ones who succeed are not necessarily the fanciest, they're the most disciplined, and they're the ones that just get up and do the good work in a sustained way over time. You know, and we've been working with small business owners for 13 years, and we just have data that proves undeniably that it's not how clever you are and charming you are and how big your vision is. It's if you're prepared to do the work, the hard day-to-day work. And to your point, you know, that is something that needs to be acknowledged. And we actually created a campaign called Thank You Small Business, which is about literally just thanking small businesses for the service that they do for our communities and our economy. But the true story of entrepreneurship is that it's hard and that we need help and we need each other. And it's a lonely journey. And the idea that we are celebrating this individuality is so counter to what is going to be required to help more small businesses succeed. We've just really gone wrong in that storyline around entrepreneurship. I feel like it is setting people up for failure, not for success.
You know, I work very closely with this group in Cincinnati called the Warrior Moms, and they're all African-American, low-income women, and they kind of swallowed the Kool-Aid that, okay, what we have to do is become entrepreneurs. And they are doing the amazing job. I call them the, trapeze artists without nets, because they don't have the social safety nets. They don't have the social capital, the actual wealth capital, all the sort of socialization and preparation that creates a foundation. that sense of agency that I was talking about. So I sort of worry that we're setting them up because we're telling them, you too can become, it's like you can become a professional basketball player. You can become a professional race car driver. You can become an entrepreneur. It's like, really? Is that what we're going to preach to everybody?
I know.
What if you're 5'2",
Right.
and you're being told you're going to be professional? You know, like, okay, there's only one like Stephen Curry, short guy out there. You know what I mean? It's like not possible, or it's
Unrealistic.
again, if we don't acknowledge what all the ingredients that really go into that, in addition to hard work, we're setting people up, I worry.
Yeah, no, I think that it's, I mean, all of this just comes down to, I think, a sense of humility. Again, humility and humanity, right? It's way more complicated than there's rock stars doing this, and then there's the rest of us schlepping around. It's a much more real and complicated equation, and it probably requires, in a little bit of ways, for all of us to get more humble and realistic, and for all of us to aspire to be more. It almost like hand in hand, and so. I think that I used to joke that, I feel like if everyone just got a therapist, we could probably solve all the problems in the world. But this conversation, we think that might actually, it comes back to that idea that so much of this just is about humanity. Again, we get stuck in politics and business models and success stories, but it's just, it comes back to just being humans together, I think, over and over and over again.
I think what you said about thanking business, and particularly, the small business people I know who are civically involved. They are donating to every everybody's knocking on their door and asking them to contribute to solving all the problems in the community, and they step up over and over and over again. Totally. And I would just say, part of what the message is to consumers is support the high road businesses, support the businesses that show up in your community over and over again. Get the best deal, but look at what people are being paid. Look at the stake that business provides in a community. I know it's probably illegal to say this, but just cut up your Amazon Prime card. Just like support your local Main Street business. They're there. It's convenient to have it come to your door, but when you go to the store, you actually see your friends too. Consumers have a huge role in the choices that we make as consumers, in what kind of communities and businesses we have. And it's our fault that some of this has gone the way it has as consumers.
Totally. I could not agree more. Our tagline for Thank You Small Business is, at the very least, you can thank a small business. At the very most, you can buy from them. Go buy from them. That is the best thank you gift you can give in exchange for the jobs they create, the communities that you live in, the economy that you benefit from. And so,
pay with cash if you can.
Yeah.
My friend who has a restaurant that's 100 yards from here, she pays $60,000 a year in credit card. That's two jobs. That's two employees. The money just left our neighborhood. We know it's convenient. We know all the benefits of it, but there's a cost to local enterprises and our local economy of sending billions of dollars off to, out to the credit card industry.
It's a really
stop by the ATM machine on your way at your bank where you don't have to pay a fee, and then do your shopping with cash.
Totally. Yeah, on the one hand, this is also complicated. And on the other hand, it's actually beautifully simple. Support your small businesses, buy from companies that care about equality, be a human, admit we all need help each other. On the one hand, it's actually beautifully simple if we would let it be. Yeah. All right, Chuck. Thank you. We went longer than I thought. Thank you for your time. This is really, really wonderful. I appreciate your honesty. All right. We'll talk soon.
Great. Well done. That was lovely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.